Hello, my name is Terry Roper. I'm the library consultant here at Region 10, and I'm sitting here in my office with my good friend Nancy Dysterlic, the dyslexia consultant here at Region 10. It's appropriate that we're sitting in this room having this conversation today because Nancy and I had a conversation in this room some weeks ago when we very first met. Nancy, do you want to tell our story?
Yes, when I first got here, my office is just around from hers, and I walked in and she has so many beautiful books, and I got to look to see how many she had and if I knew any of them, and I said, oh, I love all your books. I always hated the library when I was a little girl. And I look over at Terry and I could tell that it kind of hurt her, surprised her, and she's like, Nancy, that took me back a bit. And I said, oh, I have dyslexia. This was a hard place for me to be. And she said, do you know how hard librarians work to make it a comfortable place? And I said, well, so do dentists. And so we kind of started a friendship there. She got very tearful, and I said, well, the kids who have physical disabilities or are not as athletically inclined, what room do you think they don't enjoy? She was like, the gym. I said, right. So the library was always a very difficult place for me to go.
So it was a true eye-opener for me, never having considered the fact that the library would cause people angst, that would actually cause them tears or fear, or they would not like it. That's been so different from my experience. So I cried. We laugh and cry every conversation that we've had. Nancy laughed, Nancy cried. And she tells that story a little bit differently every time she tells it, but I do remember coming away with the fact that, oh my gosh, somebody hates the library? Why would you hate the library?
Yeah.
And so we started talking, and my eyes have been opened. So I'm thinking as a librarian, I needed to be much more aware of my students with dyslexia on the campus. So I'm hoping that this conversation will open your eyes as well. So Nancy, talk to me. You were a student with dyslexia, with dyslexia, but not diagnosed in your early years, right?
Correct.
So how did you navigate the library as a student?
Actually, I'm going to tell you, I probably became an actress. You learn how to pretend to look for a book. Your students in your classrooms or in the library that are looking very distracted or goofing off or playing around, they're avoiding. And so I knew to grab picture books, even though I knew my friends were starting to read chapter books. And so I think I just started to learn how to avoid or learn from other friends.
So as librarians, of course, especially at the first of the year, when we're getting to know our students, we ask the classroom teachers what students need special help. We can tell students that have physical disabilities. We can tell students that have language barriers. So for the most part, we can just assess. But for students with dyslexia, we can't just assess. We can't see dyslexia. And if they're masking their interaction with reading, we're not going to know unless we're really astute or we're paying attention. So that's why we're having this conversation to talk about ways to become aware. So I think awareness is our number one issue, right?
And the great thing about differentiating is whenever you say a student has dyslexia, if you have a twice exceptional student, they might actually be reading at that second and third grade level, but then they get into fourth and fifth and they're struggling, or even secondary. So just saying dyslexic student will manifest itself differently inside that library experience. So having that conversation, personal relationship with them and connecting individually, you'll better serve those students with dyslexia.
Good point. So we need to be aware of the labels, first of all, just so we're aware of that student's condition, but we can't define the student by that label. Nancy, would you talk to us a bit about twice exceptional, speaking of labels?
Yes, so there's 3 reasons why a student might be identified later. So we know now that we have the kinder and first grade screener to identify kids earlier, but your twice exceptional kid might not be screened. They might not even have their deficit known to themselves till they get in middle school and it's multisyllabic words, like now they're having struggles. Or they might make it to high school and it's when they get into foreign language or medical terminology that they start feeling a deficit. So those students aren't reading as fast as their peers, or they might not be indulged in the content that their interest or their intellect would want. They're not decoding at that level. So their experience for the library and their needs would be different.
Okay, define twice exceptional for teachers that might be aware.
Thank you. It's a student who is identified as gifted, but also a disability. So that's twice exceptional.
So they could have dyslexia and BGT all at the same time. So again, be careful of labels, look at the student. So how can librarians best know what students are dyslexic in our campus?
So we've talked about how that relationship can start, because the teacher of records are the ones that are invited to the 504 or the ARD meetings. And so we can have that communication, but we're strongly encouraging our parents to now participate in that relationship. So we've created a letter for our parents to say, go introduce yourself to the librarian, start that conversation, see if they'd be willing to have a one-on-one or to navigate the library in a time where you keep the integrity of the student intact. And so that's how you kind of build that rapport and let librarians in on that conversation.
That sounds like a great idea. I can see a parent night just for students with dyslexia. So, or it can be during the school day in which nothing but dyslexic students and their parents are in the library having free reign to navigate all the resources, ask all the questions that they want, run their fingers over whatever they need to run to, because you talked about doing finger reading and going through the motions without actually knowing what you're doing, and then talking to librarians about the best ways that they can be helped in the library on an individual basis. So what works for one student may not work for all students.
And building on that relationship, a lot of elementary schools, you will pull students out for their intervention, and at middle and high school they may be in a class. But if there's a time that the library could be closed for those classes and the dyslexia therapist goes into the library and they can talk about the different sections, and here's 2 examples. When you're asking a student to go find a book, we read with our finger and it's difficult reading like this. You're asking us to find a book where our head is sideways, the fonts are changing, the size changes, the color of how the letters are. It's very difficult to read finding a book at that on a shelf. So I think it's very beneficial if you have them come in. Then we also have fiction and nonfiction. I know that's very real to you guys, but for dyslexic, we get them often backwards because nonfiction means not real, so that would be the fake, but it's fiction's fake. So we talk about that in my classes for my students to understand those key things that come natural to you, but we're processing fiction, nonfiction section, then I'm going over there and having to read differently. So it's just, there's a lot of things to navigate, and that one-on-one time will be very beneficial.
So awareness is key. I understand you've created an awareness letter to share with parents. Talk to us about the letter.
So in their 504 or their in their ARD meeting, that's a time for us to start educating the dyslexia therapist to initiate that conversation. As the more librarians are aware that we want that, when you have parents come in for the Scholastic book readers or anything like that, having that made known, we're having that awareness, so parents are knowing that they should be involved for their child that has dyslexia.
And also encouraging parents to let the librarians know. So we want those conversations happening between parents and librarians and students, since librarians are going to be unaware if your children have dyslexia. So it's up to you to tell us so that we know how to help them. So after awareness comes, what specific supports can we offer? What strategies can we offer in the library? So you and I have talked a lot about the importance of audio to students with dyslexia.
And to educate you on the 2 types of audiobooks as a therapist that we do, I have the time I want them to listen and they're decoding and they're following along with their finger and they're seeing the correlation between hearing it and decoding. But we also want them to have the joy and pleasure of reading by listening to content and interest. So I discern the 2 between my dyslexia students and say there's 2 reasons why you might be wanting to listen to an audiobook and educating the parents. 2, they need to learn how to build the stamina for an audiobook. It's completely different than just because you can hear a story right now, you're okay. They may drift, they may daydream, so I like to have them listen for about their age. So if they're 8, listen for about 6 minutes, pause the recorder, check for understanding, are you still paying attention, and then build the stamina for audiobooks. So this is what we have partnered, Terry and I together, and Nancy Watson, who's also our technology consultant here that is working with us. So have you read a good book lately? And we're encouraging through the International Dyslexia Association that we really want every student to know that books are available to them, including audio.
Allow me to rephrase. Have you heard a good book?
Oh, what did I say? Did I say read? You know, maybe I have dyslexia. I should get tested.
So I love this whole awareness campaign. Graphic looks great. So it's all about letting parents and teachers, everyone, it's centered around that child, understand that if we're all in this together, we need to be aware of that child's needs in order to best meet that child's needs. So audio is critical, and as librarians, we know we've got several avenues to get audiobooks. Many of us are ordering, just went out of my head, Playways, the self-contained units with audio. We also have the old recordings. We have a lot of streamlined or online video clips that we can use for our students. So librarians need to be aware of what audio resources they have in their library at their disposal. Also what's available at the public library if they're downloading audiobooks, because those are free resources we can certainly tap into. So if there's not extra monies for these, and where am I going to find all these audiobooks for these students that need audiobooks, there are sources out there.
And then we have in our, your school district should have for the dyslexia program Learning Ally and Bookshare. So the librarian using that content or talking about it with that student, they're like, wait, you know too? Yes, let me help you with Learning Ally. Let me help you with Bookshare. That way they're hearing that that's another positive way to be linked to the library and not feel different.
Awesome, because it's all about not feeling different. You know, at certain ages, that's the critical thing. So these students want to feel like everyone else in the library, and they deserve to feel
Right.
like everyone else in the library, including having every right to choose what they want to read or listen to in the library.
That's right.
So librarians need to start collecting their resources and then putting them into some container so that they can share those resources with the parents when they come in and the classroom teachers, because we want to make sure students' needs are being met in the library and beyond.
And then to add something, what Terry has done for me as well is we have a list of dyslexia books, and I'm encouraging my parents to have parent libraries so they're strong advocates and their children can see the social emotional aspects of dyslexia. And Terry continues to bring me more and more books that I'm utilizing for my parents. So having that section in your library, letting those kids know that they're available and being aware of educating the other students on what dyslexia is another key awareness.
We're talking about professional books for people that are dealing with students with dyslexia, for parents and teachers. We're also talking trade books for where students can find kids like themselves in those books.
Yes.
Maybe it's GT kids, maybe it's kids with dyslexia. We just need to know, kids need to find themselves in those books so that they know they belong.
Absolutely.
So we need to have a wide range of those audiobooks. Have we talked about our Parent Night for Dyslexia option? So I can't remember if we did or not. So for Parent Night, closing the library and bringing in parents and students alone just to explore the library and all the resources, including looking at picture books and where to find them in the library, where book lists are. Looking at wordless picture books is an option for dyslexic students. So it's critical with all the social emotional aspects that we understand kids with dyslexia in the library can navigate just as well as a student that does not have dyslexia. So we want to make sure that we give them private time to talk. We give them appropriate wait time. We all know what it's like when there's 40 minutes till a bell rings, and we never really have truly 40 minutes. Kids rush in, get the books checked in, do a library lesson quickly, get the books checked out, and get out the door. So constantly someone is saying, quick, grab a book, quick, grab a book. Under the best of circumstances, quick, grab a book is not the best option. It's even more troublesome or
Right.
dangerous
Difficult,
for students with dyslexia, right? So they might need extra time to navigate. You talked about having to pull the books off the shelf and look at them. So reading spines really doesn't help you at all.
No, I would have to look at the pictures. The first thing I would do is I pull it out to see the pictures, but then I also look to see if the font was big enough for me. And I'd also look to see how many words are on the page. And if I felt like it was going to be too difficult for me to read in my checkout time, which is a week, then I would even select the book. And I love that you talked about Parent Night as well. Dyslexia is inherited. So you may have a parent who will come in and they'll say, you know, I didn't like the library either. You know, I never wanted to be in here. And now you've made a relationship and a correlation to where, like Terry did for me, where you're now feeling like, wow, this is a place I can feel safe. So your parents may be timid to come in as well. So you have an opportunity to make it generational, that they say, we'd love for you to come in here and enjoy it.
The power of the library. I love that. It's very social emotional, as you can tell, because we're talking people. These are real people here with real people needs. So thinking about things we can do in the library and things that we shouldn't do in the library. At the beginning of the year, typically we have scavenger hunts and we have orientation so that students are welcome to the library. And typically this is done whole class, so people are everywhere. It can be noisy. It can be fun and exciting as we want it to be, but for dyslexic students that may present a problem.
Absolutely. So I'm going to flip a little bit to the secondary teacher, and we asked if we could shut it down because there's so many research projects, essays, and the books that you're pulling are difficult. So, and you're around peers where you do not want anybody to know that you're struggling. So we created a laminated D, and we met the librarian privately. And not every student that's dyslexic needed one. It's my kids that were struggling, they were not passing STAR, they were failing their classes, the kids who really needed that additional support. They could give her that laminated D, it just meant for my name, and that meant she would pull the books for them. And they'd have an oral conversation, hey, I'm needing a research project on Paul Revere. And she was like, all right, thank you for coming up here. She kept the integrity intact for my students. She pulled those books, maybe later they'd pick them up after class. But that relationship was preserved, and the way they looked to their peers was preserved. So it was very powerful. And then the scavenger hunt, like I said, fiction and nonfiction in areas of the library. Yes, they were taught it. You all did a great job in elementary, but we were still learning decoding, so we were already behind. And so now middle school, I wasn't paying attention because I had my other strategies. So it was kind of nice to learn the library in a pace that I could learn it with just the librarian. And so I think if you really do allow them to ask those questions, we call them dumb questions, but for us they're not. we're saying, okay, I don't understand why they're in numbers. I don't understand how it's organized. And when the teacher takes the time, the librarian, to say that's why these all go together, like, oh, it makes sense now. So I think that one-on-one, but we've talked about too, when your emotions are high, your ability to process and learn isn't there, or it's less. And so if my emotions are high in the library, I'm not taking in the things that you all are trying to share with me.
And I can understand being panicked already, walking in with a sea of books that you can't decipher, and the librarian says it's in the L's or the M's, and you're, okay, I'm not sure what an L looks like, where can I find it?
Well, and to piggyback on that, when you're in elementary school, your teacher, you'll say, okay, I can't spell circle. So she'll say, go look it up in a dictionary, and I'm here to tell you, circle is not in the S's.
So spell it like it sounds doesn't always work,
It
folks.
doesn't always work for us. So us getting the strategies that you think are beneficial to most might not be beneficial to us.
So a lot of the things you've heard Nancy talk about, you might be saying, well, those are good strategies for all learners. And you're right. Often these special strategies we talk about for students in a certain group are just good, effective strategies for all learners. But then when you layer that on top of the thinking, it's in the S's, or with students that can't navigate a vertical spine, or can't find the labels on the shelves, or can't decipher the labels on the shelves, we need to think of alternate things we can do, such as maybe pictures or images to help them navigate. So if you like books about dogs, it's not in the 354s or the L's, find the picture of the dog. So something that's in a non-threatening, non-derogatory way, so the students will understand and be able to navigate the library the same as all the other students.
That's right.
Cool. So we want to make sure we understand ways that dyslexia students can feel at home in the library in a non-threatening environment. Schedule those classes into the library, going through the dyslexia teacher. I do want to say, previously she talked about the laminated D. That's not for the word dyslexia, it's for Dysterlic, her last name. So we're not giving them a scarlet letter, that they're going to wear on their forehead. It's about the teacher, just as a subtle clue to the librarian that this is a student asking for help, and it's because they're in Mr. Dysterlic's class. So I would then know that they were dyslexic.
Yeah, you can even have a picture of a library book. It could be anything.
Anything, just a question mark or a help please or something.
Right.
Just a cue.
Good clarification.
So we talked about signage. Just like we use Braille for students that are sight impaired, we can use images for students that have dyslexia that can't decipher letters or numbers. Sometimes we pull books for those students. Maybe that would still be helpful. So they have processing issues, so they can't break things down into parts, correct?
Correct.
So that's going to hamper their understanding of how the library operates.
Absolutely.
But with extra time and answering their questions, and first of all, meeting their social emotional needs, letting them know they're safe in the library.
That's right.
That can be
absolutely. I think that's number one.
Awesome.
Knowing, because we're already intimidated, and if a librarian, because we're rushing, because we're in that room, and they're across the room, and they're like, no, the other shelf, just that little tiny moment. The librarian's intentions are spot on, they're helping.
Right.
But for them, now they wonder, now does everybody know I needed help? No one was even thinking it.
Right. It's just
but those
that
are those
one person, right? And that can make or break a student.
It changes how they feel.
And unfortunately, we know one bad experience in the library can totally change that person's reading life, which is huge. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today, Nancy.
Thank you.
Even all the times you've made me cry, all the times you made me think, oh my goodness, have I, as a librarian, had students in my library that had dyslexia that I wasn't best meeting their needs. So I needed to have this talk years ago. It's time we have it now, and it's time we make sure everyone is aware of best ways and best practices to make dyslexic students at home in your library. Thank you so much, Nancy.
Thank you for having me.
So glad
I appreciate
you're here.
it.
Thank you.